The sun had already stolen every drop of moisture from Lydia Sullivan's cracked lips when she realized her horse was dying beneath her. And if she didn't find water within the hour, she would be joining him in whatever afterlife awaited foolish women who thought they could cross the Kansas desert alone in the summer of 1873. She had been so certain of the route when she left Independence 3 days ago. The map her late father had sketched showed a clear path westward to Concordia, where her aunt supposedly ran a boarding house. But somewhere between the Third River crossing and the endless sea of prairie grass that had given way to this God-forsaken stretch of barren earth, Lydia had taken a wrong turn. Or perhaps it was 2 wrong turns. She had stopped counting yesterday when the landmarks ceased making any sense. The mare beneath her stumbled again, and Lydia felt the animal's labored breathing through her thighs. She dismounted quickly, not wanting to burden the creature further. Her own legs nearly buckled when her boots hit the hard, packed earth. The hem of her traveling dress was caked with dust the color of old blood, and her once white sleeves were streaked with grime and sweat. "I'm sorry, girl," she whispered, running her hand down the horse's foam-flecked neck. The mare's eyes were glazed, her head hanging low. Lydia knew she should have stopped hours ago, should have sought shelter from the relentless sun, but fear had driven her forward. Fear of dying out here alone, fear of vultures picking at her bones, fear of never being found. She was 22 years old, and she had survived her father's death from consumption, survived the loss of their small farm outside Philadelphia, survived the long train journey west with nothing but the clothes on her back and $43 sewn into the lining of her corset. She had not come all this way to die within spitting distance of a new life. Lydia pulled her canteen from the saddle and shook it. Empty. She had finished the last of her water at dawn, convinced she would find a stream or settlement by midday. The sun now sat directly overhead, a merciless white disk in a sky bleached of all color. She untied her small carpetbag from behind the saddle and slung it over her shoulder. The mare would have to fend for herself. Lydia could not bear to watch the animal die, and she certainly could not help her. She had to keep moving, had to find water, had to survive. The first step away from her horse took more courage than anything Lydia had ever done. The second step was easier. By the 10th step, she had found a rhythm, though her boots were not made for walking long distances, and she could already feel blisters forming on her heels. She walked for what might have been an hour or might have been 4. Time moved strangely in the heat. The landscape refused to change, just endless rolling hills of scrub brush and pale dirt, punctuated by the occasional twisted juniper tree that offered no shade. Her shadow shortened and then began to lengthen again. Her thoughts grew fuzzy at the edges. Lydia was thinking about her mother's lemon cake when she saw the rider. At first, she thought it was a mirage, one of those tricks of light and heat she had heard about. But as the figure drew closer, resolving into the solid shape of a man on horseback, she felt something between relief and terror surge through her chest. Out here, a stranger could be salvation or damnation, and there was no way to know which until it was too late. The man rode with the easy confidence of someone who belonged to this harsh land. His horse was a sturdy buckskin gelding, and the man himself was tall in the saddle, wearing a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the sun. As he approached, Lydia could make out more details. The weathered leather of his vest, the red bandana tied around his neck, the rifle secured to his saddle. His face was shadowed by the hat, but she could see the strong line of his jaw, darkened by several days of stubble. He reined in his horse about 10 feet from where Lydia stood swaying on her feet. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. She was acutely aware of how she must look a bedraggled woman alone in the middle of nowhere, probably half dead from thirst and sunstroke. "Madam," he said finally, his voice low and rough as sandpaper. He touched the brim of his hat. "You look like you could use some help." Lydia tried to respond, but her throat was too dry. She managed a small nod instead. The man swung down from his horse with fluid grace and pulled a canteen from his saddle. He approached her slowly, as if she were a spooked animal that might bolt. "Here," he said, holding out the canteen. "Small sips at first, or you'll make yourself sick." She took the canteen with shaking hands and raised it to her lips. The water was warm and tasted faintly of metal, but it was the most glorious thing she had ever experienced. She forced herself to follow his advice, taking tiny sips even though she wanted to gulp the entire contents. "Easy now," he said, and she noticed his eyes for the first time. They were a startling shade of gray-blue, like storm clouds over the ocean, and they held genuine concern. "That's good. Just a little more, then we'll wait." When Lydia finally lowered the canteen, she found her voice. "Thank you." The words came out as barely more than a whisper. "Oliver Vance," he said, taking the canteen back and replacing the cap. "Most folks call me Ollie, but I prefer Oliver. I've got a ranch about 6 miles north of here near Concordia." "Concordia," Lydia repeated, and she felt her knees go weak with relief. "That's where I was trying to get to. I'm Lydia Sullivan." "Well, Miss Sullivan, you were walking in the wrong direction. Concordia is east of here, not west." Lydia closed her eyes and felt the hot sting of tears. She had been moving away from safety all along. "I got lost," she said, stating the obvious. "My horse gave out a few miles back. I hoped—" "You hoped you'd find someone before you died of thirst," Oliver finished. "That was a dangerous gamble. I didn't have much choice." He studied her for a moment, and she found herself straightening under his gaze, refusing to show weakness even though every part of her body screamed exhaustion. "No," he said slowly. "I suppose you didn't. You've got grit, I'll give you that. Not many women would still be standing after what you've been through. I'm stronger than I look." Something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I can see that." He glanced up at the sun, then back at her. "We need to get you out of this heat. My place is closer than town. You can rest there, get cleaned up, and I'll take you into Concordia in the morning." Lydia hesitated. Her father had warned her about trusting strange men, especially out west where law and order could be as scarce as water. But what choice did she have? She could either trust this cowboy or die in the desert. Those seemed to be her only options. "I appreciate the offer," she said carefully, "but I wouldn't want to impose. It's not an imposition. It's common decency." Oliver walked back to his horse and pulled a bedroll from behind the saddle. He spread it on the ground in the meager shade of a scraggly bush. "Sit down before you fall down, Miss Sullivan. Rest for a few minutes, then we'll get moving." Lydia's legs made the decision for her, folding beneath her as she sank onto the bedroll. The relief of being off her feet was almost overwhelming. Oliver offered her the canteen again, and this time she took several longer sips. "What brings you out to Concordia?" he asked, settling onto his heels a respectful distance away. "Doesn't seem like the kind of place a Philadelphia woman would aim for." "How did you know I'm from Philadelphia? Your accent. And your clothes, what's left of them. That city tailoring." Lydia glanced down at her ruined dress. It had been one of her best, dove gray with black trim, appropriate for traveling. Now it looked like something she should burn. "My aunt runs a boarding house in Concordia. I'm going to stay with her, help her with the business. After my father died, there was nothing left for me back east." "I'm sorry about your father." "Thank you." She paused, then asked, "Were you out here looking for something? Or do you just ride around the desert hoping to find lost travelers?" This time Oliver did smile, and it transformed his face completely. He was younger than she had first thought, probably not much older than 30, with laugh lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often. I was checking on some cattle that wandered off from the main herd. Found their tracks leading this way. Didn't find the cattle, but I found you instead. Lucky me. Lucky both of us. I'd hate to think what would have happened if I'd decided to search in a different direction. Lydia didn't want to think about that either. She took another sip of water and tried to focus on the present moment, on the fact that she was alive and had been found. Tell me about Concordia. I've never been there. All I know is what my aunt wrote in her letters. Oliver settled into a more comfortable position, crossing his long legs. It's a decent town. Growing, now that the railroad came through. Maybe 2,000 people, give or take. Got a main street with the usual businesses: general store, saloon, hotel, church, blacksmith. The land around here is good for ranching, though the weather can be harsh. Hot as hell in summer, cold as death in winter, and we don't get much rain. But folks who settle here are tough. They have to be. And your ranch, you work it alone. I've got 3 men who help me out: Jack, Pete, and a kid named Thomas who's still learning. We run about 500 head of cattle, some horses. It's hard work, but it's mine. I built it from nothing, and that means something. There was pride in his voice, and Lydia understood it. She had watched her father work himself to exhaustion trying to keep their farm afloat, had seen the satisfaction on his face during the rare good harvests. How long have you been out here? 7 years. Came west after the war ended. Didn't see much point in going back to Missouri. Too many memories, too many ghosts. His expression darkened for a moment, and Lydia recognized the look of someone who had seen things they wished they could forget. You fought 3 years. Long enough. He stood abruptly, signaling the end of that conversation. Can you ride? We need to get moving if we're going to make it back before dark. Lydia let him help her to her feet. Her legs felt more stable now, the water working its way through her system. I can ride. Good. You'll be behind me. Horse can carry us both for 6 miles without much trouble. He rolled up the bedroll and secured it back on his saddle, then swung up onto the buckskin with easy grace. He held out his hand to Lydia, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. His grip was strong and calloused, and he pulled her up behind him as if she weighed nothing. Hold on tight, he said. Trail gets rough in places. Lydia wrapped her arms around his waist, acutely aware of the solid warmth of him, the way his body moved with the horse. She had never been this close to a man who wasn't family, and it felt both strange and oddly natural. Through his shirt, she could feel the steady beat of his heart. Oliver clicked his tongue, and the buckskin started forward at an easy walk. The motion of the horse, the rhythm of the gait, was soothing after hours of walking. Lydia let herself relax slightly, resting her cheek against Oliver's shoulder blade. You doing all right back there? He asked after a few minutes. Yes, thank you for everything. Don't thank me yet, still got a ways to go. They rode in silence for a while, and Lydia watched the landscape slowly change. The barren scrubland gradually gave way to sparse grass, then to rolling prairie dotted with wildflowers. She saw cattle in the distance, dark shapes against the golden grass. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermal currents. Oliver, she said finally. Why did you say that, about me being stronger than I look? He was quiet for a moment, guiding the horse around a patch of rocks. Because it's true, you could have given up back there. Could have sat down and waited to die, but you kept walking. That takes courage. It felt more like stubbornness. Sometimes there's not much difference between the two. He paused, then added, You're braver than you know, Miss Sullivan. I've seen grown men break in situations less desperate than the one you were in. But you held yourself together. That's worth something. Lydia felt unexpected tears prick at her eyes. She couldn't remember the last time someone had said something kind to her, had seen strength in her instead of weakness. In Philadelphia, after her father's death, she had been pitied. The poor Sullivan girl, all alone in the world, no prospects, no future. Out here, Oliver saw something different. He saw a survivor. "Thank you," she whispered, tightening her arms around his waist. They rode on as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Lydia had never seen such a sunset. In the city, buildings blocked the view, but here the sky seemed to go on forever, an endless canvas of color. "There," Oliver said, pointing ahead. "That's my place." Lydia looked past his shoulder and saw buildings in the distance. As they drew closer, she could make out a house, a barn, several outbuildings and corrals. It was modest but well-maintained, everything painted white and neat as a pin. Smoke rose from the chimney, and she could see men working near the barn. One of the men looked up as they approached and waved. He was older, probably in his 50s, with graying hair and a weathered face. "Boss, we were starting to worry. You find those strays?" "No sign of them, Jack, but I found something else." Oliver reined in the buckskin near the house and helped Lydia slide down from the horse. Her legs were stiff from the ride and she swayed slightly. Jack's eyes widened when he saw her. "Good Lord, where did she come from?" "About 6 miles west, walking toward the middle of nowhere. This is Miss Lydia Sullivan. She was trying to get to Concordia to stay with her aunt." "Well, you're lucky the boss found you, miss. That's rough country out there." Jack touched his hat respectfully. "Welcome to the Vance ranch." "Thank you," Lydia said, suddenly aware again of how terrible she must look. She pushed a strand of hair out of her face, feeling the grit of dust and sand. "Jack, can you take care of Dusty for me?" Oliver asked, handing over the reins. "Miss Sullivan needs food, water, and a place to rest." "Of course, boss." Jack led the horse toward the barn, glancing back once with obvious curiosity. Oliver turned to Lydia, and in the golden light of sunset, his eyes were almost silver. "Come on, let's get you inside." The house was small but comfortable, with a main room that served as both kitchen and sitting area, and 2 doors leading to what she assumed were bedrooms. The furniture was simple but well made, everything clean and orderly in a way that surprised her. She had expected bachelor quarters to be messy. "I'll heat some water for washing," Oliver said, moving to the stove and stoking the fire. "You must be starving. When did you last eat?" Lydia tried to remember. "Yesterday morning, some hardtack and dried apples." "That's not enough to keep a bird alive." He pulled out a large pot and filled it with water from a bucket, then set it on the stove. "I've got stew left from yesterday. It's not fancy, but it's filling. And there's bread." "That sounds like heaven," Lydia said honestly. While the water heated, Oliver ladled stew into a bowl and set it on the table with a thick slice of bread and butter. Lydia sat down and tried to eat slowly, but she was so hungry that she barely tasted the food. It was good rich beef with potatoes and carrots, seasoned with salt and pepper and something she couldn't quite identify. "Your cook is talented," she said between bites. Oliver laughed, a warm sound that filled the room. "I'm the cook. Not much talent required for stew, just patience." "You made this?" Lydia looked at him with new appreciation. Most men she knew couldn't boil water without burning it. "Had to learn when I moved out here. It was either that or starve." He checked the water on the stove, then pulled out a large basin and set it on the floor near the hearth. "This isn't a proper bath, but it'll help you feel more human." "I can't take your water. You need it too." "I have a well, Miss Sullivan. Water's not scarce here like it is out in the desert. Besides, you need it more than I do." When the water was warm, Oliver poured it into the basin and added some cold water from the bucket to temper it. He handed her a clean towel and a bar of soap. "There's a screen in the corner you can use for privacy." Take your time. I'll be outside checking on the horses." After he left, Lydia moved behind the screen and stripped off her ruined dress and undergarments. The sight of her own body shocked her. Every visible inch of skin was red from sunburn or streaked with dirt. Her feet were a mess of blisters and cuts. She sank down beside the basin and began to wash, wincing as the water touched her damaged skin. It took 3 complete scrubs before she felt clean. She washed her hair as well, working her fingers through the tangles, watching the water turn muddy brown. When she was finished, she realized she had nothing clean to wear. Her carpetbag contained 2 changes of undergarments and a nightgown, but all her dresses were either on her back or back in the bag on her dying horse. There was a soft knock on the door. "Miss Sullivan, I'm leaving a shirt and some trousers out here. They'll be too big, but they're clean." "Thank you," she called back, wrapping the towel around herself. She waited until she heard the door close again, then peeked around the screen. True to his word, Oliver had left a neatly folded shirt and pair of trousers on the chair near the door. She dressed quickly, rolling up the sleeves and cuffs. The clothes swallowed her, but they were soft and clean and smelled faintly of soap and sunshine. When Oliver returned a few minutes later, he stopped in the doorway and stared at her. Lydia felt herself blush under his scrutiny. "I know I look ridiculous." "No," he said slowly. "You look better, healthier." He cleared his throat and moved to the stove, busying himself with making coffee. "You can sleep in my room tonight. I'll bunk with the men in the bunkhouse. I can't take your bed. I'll sleep out here on the floor. You'll sleep in a proper bed after what you've been through, and that's final." His tone brooked no argument. "You need rest, real rest. Tomorrow I'll take you into town to find your aunt." Lydia was too tired to argue. She finished the last of her stew and bread while Oliver poured 2 cups of coffee. He sat across from her at the table, cradling his cup in both hands. "Tell me about your aunt," he said. "What's her name?" "Margaret Sullivan. She's my father's older sister. She came west after her husband died about 5 years ago. Her letters always made Concordia sound like a place where someone could make a fresh start." "Margaret Sullivan," Oliver repeated, his brow furrowing. "Runs the boarding house on Elm Street." "Yes, that's her. Do you know her?" "Everyone knows Miss Margaret. She's one of the pillars of the community. Runs a tight ship, doesn't tolerate nonsense, but she's fair and kind. You'll be in good hands with her." Relief washed over Lydia. "I'm glad to hear that. To be honest, I was a little nervous. We've never met in person. She left Philadelphia before I was born, and my father had a falling out with her over her marriage. They only reconciled through letters in the last few years." "Family disagreements," Oliver said with a nod. "I understand that better than most. My father and I didn't speak for years before he died. I'm sorry. Don't be. Some bridges are meant to burn." He took a sip of his coffee, staring into the dark liquid. "But it sounds like your father and his sister managed to rebuild theirs. That's good." They talked for a while longer, their conversation ranging from safe topics, the weather, the town, the challenges of living in Kansas, to more personal ones. Lydia found herself telling Oliver about her father's illness, about watching him waste away over the course of a year, about the helplessness she had felt. He listened without interrupting, his gray-blue eyes focused entirely on her. In turn, Oliver told her about his ranch, about the hard work of building it from scratch, about the satisfaction of seeing his cattle herd grow year after year. He spoke of Jack, Pete, and Thomas with obvious affection, and Lydia realized that these men were his family now, the people he relied on and cared for. "It's a good life," he said finally, draining the last of his coffee. "Hard, but good. Out here, you're only limited by your own determination and the weather, and some years the weather wins." Lydia smiled. "That's more freedom than I've ever had. In Philadelphia, women are limited by much more than determination and weather. Is that why you came west, for freedom? Partly. Mostly because I had no other choice. But I think I would have come eventually anyway. I was never content with the life that was laid out for me: marry well, run a household, have children, never venture beyond the acceptable boundaries of society. It felt like a cage. And what do you want instead? No one had ever asked her that before. Lydia thought about it, turning the question over in her mind. I want to matter. I want to build something of my own, something that will last. I want to wake up every morning and know that my life belongs to me. Oliver studied her across the table, and something shifted in his expression. You're going to do just fine out here, Miss Sullivan. Concordia won't know what hit it. The way he said it, with such absolute certainty, made Lydia's heart skip a beat. She realized with a start that she liked this man. More than liked him. In the space of a few hours, Oliver Vance had shown her more respect and kindness than most men had shown her in a lifetime. And there was something else, something that sparked between them whenever their eyes met, a pull she didn't quite understand but couldn't deny. You should get some sleep, Oliver said, standing and collecting their cups. It's been a long day, and tomorrow won't be any easier. Town's about an hour's ride, and we'll need to leave early to beat the heat. What time is early? Sunrise. Around 5:30, Lydia groaned. That is early. Welcome to ranch life. He showed her to his bedroom, a small but clean space with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the prairie. There's extra blankets if you need them, though I doubt you will. It stays pretty warm at night this time of year. Thank you, Oliver, for everything. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. He paused in the doorway, silhouetted against the lamplight from the main room. You don't owe me anything, Lydia. Any decent person would have done the same. But Lydia wasn't sure that was true. The world was full of people who would have ridden past a desperate woman in the desert, who would have left her to die rather than inconvenience themselves. Oliver had stopped, had helped, had opened his home to a stranger. That meant something. After he closed the door, Lydia sat on the edge of the bed and looked around the room. It was sparse but comfortable, and she could see touches of Oliver's personality in the details: a few books stacked on the dresser, a sketch of a horse tacked to the wall, a pocket watch sitting on the nightstand. She picked up the watch and opened it, finding a faded photograph inside. A woman and a young boy, both dressed in their Sunday best. She closed the watch quickly, feeling like an intruder, and set it back where she had found it. Then she lay down on the bed, still wearing Oliver's oversized clothes, and stared at the ceiling. Her body was exhausted, but her mind was racing. She thought about the desert, about how close she had come to dying. She thought about Oliver's words, "You're braver than you know." Was she? Or had she simply been too stubborn to give up? She had always thought of herself as ordinary, unremarkable. But maybe surviving wasn't about being extraordinary. Maybe it was just about taking one more step, even when everything inside you screamed to quit. Lydia closed her eyes and let exhaustion pull her under. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was of gray-blue eyes and a gentle voice saying, "You're going to do just fine out here." She woke to the sound of roosters crowing and the smell of coffee brewing. Pale dawn light filtered through the window, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. For a moment, Lydia couldn't remember where she was. Then the events of yesterday came rushing back. She sat up slowly, wincing as her muscles protested. Every part of her body ached: her feet, her legs, her shoulders, her sunburned skin. But she was alive, and that was what mattered. There was a soft knock on the door. "Miss Sullivan, you awake?" "Yes," she called back, her voice rough with sleep. "Breakfast is ready when you are." "We'll leave in about 30 minutes. Lydia found her cleaned undergarments hanging over a chair. Oliver must have washed them after she went to bed, and she dressed quickly, layering them under the borrowed shirt and trousers. Her boots were by the door, also cleaned, though they looked worse for wear. She pulled them on gingerly, trying not to aggravate her blisters. In the main room, Oliver was placing plates on the table. He had already eaten, judging by the dirty dish in the wash basin, but he had prepared eggs, bacon, and fresh biscuits for her. Lydia's stomach growled appreciatively. "Good morning," he said, glancing up. His hair was damp, as if he had just washed and he had shaved. Without the stubble, he looked younger and somehow more vulnerable. "How did you sleep?" "Like the dead," Lydia admitted, sitting down. "Best sleep I've had in weeks." "Good, eat up. We've got a ride ahead of us." The food was simple but delicious, and Lydia ate every bite. While she finished, Oliver packed a small bag with supplies: water, food, a bedroll, his rifle. He moved with practiced efficiency, and she found herself watching the way his hands worked, strong and capable. When she was ready, they walked outside together. The ranch was already bustling with activity. Jack and Pete were working in the corrals, and young Thomas was mucking out stalls in the barn. They all waved as Oliver and Lydia passed. Oliver had saddled a different horse, a gentle-looking mare with a kind eye. "This is Rosie," he said, patting the horse's neck. "She's steadier than Dusty, better for carrying too." He helped Lydia mount, then swung up behind her this time, wrapping one arm around her waist to hold the reins. "Comfortable?" "Yes," Lydia said, though comfortable was relative when every muscle in her body felt like it had been beaten with a stick. They set off toward the rising sun, following a well-worn trail through the prairie. The morning air was cool and fresh, not yet heavy with heat, and birds sang from the tall grass. Lydia leaned back slightly against Oliver's chest, letting him take her weight. "Tell me what to expect when we get to town," she said. "I don't want to embarrass myself." Concordia is pretty straightforward. Main Street runs north to south. Your aunt's boarding house is on the east side, about halfway down. It's a big white house with green shutters, hard to miss. We'll stop there first. What if she doesn't recognize me? What if she doesn't want me there? She'll recognize you and she'll want you there. Oliver squeezed her waist reassuringly. "Margaret's been talking about you coming for months. She's excited even if she doesn't show it." "How do you know that?" "I board there sometimes when I come to town. She's mentioned you more than once." Lydia felt a flutter of nerves in her stomach. She wanted so desperately for this to work out, for her aunt to welcome her, for Concordia to feel like home. But what if it didn't? What if she had come all this way only to find herself unwanted and alone? "Stop worrying," Oliver said softly, as if he could read her thoughts. "You're going to be fine. Your aunt is a good woman and she needs help running that boarding house. You're exactly what she's been looking for. You barely know me. How can you be so sure?" "Because I've seen how you handle yourself under pressure. That tells me everything I need to know." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the rhythm of the horses' hooves steady and soothing. Lydia watched the landscape change as they got closer to town: more trees, cultivated fields, signs of human habitation. A freight wagon passed them heading the opposite direction, the driver tipping his hat. "There," Oliver said, pointing ahead. "That's Concordia." The town appeared on the horizon, a cluster of buildings rising from the prairie like a mirage. As they got closer, Lydia could make out individual structures: the church steeple, the false fronts of the shops along Main Street, houses spreading out in all directions. It was bigger than she had expected, more established. They rode down Main Street at a walk, and Lydia felt people staring. A woman alone in men's clothing, riding double with a cowboy, was apparently noteworthy. She tried to ignore the looks and focus on the town itself. There was a general store, A saloon, a hotel, a dress shop, a doctor's office, a bank. Everything a growing town needed. Oliver guided Rosie east onto Elm Street, and halfway down the block, he stopped in front of a large white house with green shutters, exactly as he had described. A sign hanging from the porch proclaimed it Sullivan's boarding house. Flower boxes filled with petunias lined the windows, and the yard was neat and well kept. "This is it," Oliver said, dismounting and helping Lydia down. Before they could even reach the porch, the front door flew open and a woman emerged. She was tall and solidly built, with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. She wore a simple day dress and an apron, and her hands were dusted with flour. "Oliver Vance," she said, her voice commanding. "What on earth do you have there?" "Morning, Miss Margaret. I found your niece wandering in the desert yesterday. Thought you might want her back." The woman's eyes swung to Lydia, and for a long moment they just stared at each other. Then Margaret Sullivan's stern expression cracked, and her face transformed with joy. "Lydia! Oh, my dear child, is it really you?" "Yes, Aunt Margaret, it's me." In 3 quick steps, Margaret closed the distance between them and pulled Lydia into a fierce embrace. She smelled like cinnamon and vanilla, and her hug was strong enough to make Lydia's ribs ache. Thank God you're safe. I've been worried sick. You were supposed to arrive 2 days ago." "I got lost," Lydia admitted, her voice muffled against her aunt's shoulder. "I took a wrong turn somewhere, and then my horse gave out, and I would have died if Oliver hadn't found me." Margaret pulled back, holding Lydia at arm's length and looking her over with a critical eye. "You're sunburned and half-starved. And what are you wearing?" "My dress was ruined." "Oliver lent me his clothes." Margaret turned her sharp gaze on Oliver. "Did he now? And where did you spend the night, young lady?" "At my ranch," Oliver said quickly. "She slept in my room. I bunked with the hands. Everything was completely proper, Miss Margaret, I swear it." The older woman studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "I believe you. You're a good man, Oliver Vance, even if you do spend too much time with cattle and not enough time courting." She turned back to Lydia. "Come inside. You need food, rest, and proper clothing. Oliver, you'll stay for breakfast. It's the least I can do to thank you for bringing my niece home safely." "I already ate, but I wouldn't say no to coffee." They went inside, and Lydia found herself in a spacious entry hall with stairs leading to the second floor and doorways opening into a parlor and dining room. Everything was clean and well-maintained, decorated with simple taste. Margaret led them to the kitchen, a large room at the back of the house with a massive stove and a long table. "Sit," Margaret commanded, pointing at chairs. "Both of you." While she poured coffee and put together a plate of biscuits and jam, Margaret peppered Lydia with questions. When did she leave Independence? What route did she take? How did she get lost? Why didn't she stay put when she realized she was turned around? Lydia answered as best she could, feeling like a child being scolded. But beneath her aunt's stern questioning, she could sense genuine concern and relief. This woman had been worried about her, had cared whether she arrived safely. It was a strange feeling after months of being alone. "Well," Margaret said finally, setting the coffee and biscuits on the table, "what's done is done. The important thing is you're here now, safe and sound, thanks to Oliver." She looked at the cowboy with obvious fondness. "How did you find her?" "Pure luck," Oliver admitted. "I was out looking for strays and rode right past her. Another hour, maybe 2, and I might have missed her entirely." "It wasn't luck. It was providence." Margaret sat down with her own cup of coffee. "The good Lord looks after fools and lost travelers, or so my mother used to say." They talked for a while longer, the conversation easier now. Margaret told Lydia about the boarding house, about the current residents, a schoolteacher, a bank clerk, a widow, and a traveling salesman who came through once a month. She explained the routine, the expectations, the work that would be required. "I won't lie to you," Margaret said. "Running this place is hard work. Cooking, cleaning, laundry, repairs, dealing with difficult lodgers. But it's mine and it's profitable and it's given me a good life. If you're willing to work, there's a place for you here." "I'm willing," Lydia said without hesitation. "I want to help. I want to be useful. Good. Then we'll get along just fine." Margaret stood and collected the empty cups. "Oliver, thank you again for bringing Lydia home. I'm in your debt." "No debt, Miss Margaret, just doing what anyone should do." He stood as well, settling his hat back on his head. "I should get back to the ranch. Lots of work waiting." Lydia followed him to the door, suddenly reluctant to see him go. This man had saved her life, had shown her kindness and respect, had made her feel strong when she felt weak. "Oliver, I don't know how to thank you properly." "You don't need to thank me, Lydia." "Yes, I do. You saved my life if you hadn't found me, but I did find you. And now you're safe with your aunt, starting your new life. That's thanks enough." He paused, seeming to struggle with something. "I come to town every week or so for supplies. Maybe I'll see you around." "I'd like that," Lydia said softly. Their eyes met and held, and Lydia felt that spark again, stronger now. Oliver reached out and gently touched her cheek, his thumb brushing across her sunburned skin with infinite care. "Take care of yourself, Lydia Sullivan." "You too, Oliver Vance." He turned and walked to his horse, swinging into the saddle with practiced ease. He looked back once, touched the brim of his hat, and then rode away. Lydia stood on the porch watching until he disappeared around the corner onto Main Street. "Well," Margaret said from behind her, "that's interesting." Lydia turned to find her aunt watching her with knowing eyes. "What's interesting?" "The way you two look at each other. Oliver Vance is a good man and a fine catch. Half the unmarried women in this town have set their caps for him." "I just met him yesterday, Aunt Margaret, and he saved my life. Of course I'm grateful. Hum. Gratitude, if that's what you want to call it." Margaret's expression softened. "Come, child, let's get you settled. You need proper clothes and a bath, not necessarily in that order. And then you can tell me everything about your journey, the whole truth this time, not the censored version you gave with Oliver in the room." Over the next few days, Lydia settled into life at the boarding house. She met the other residents, all of whom were polite if not particularly friendly. She learned the routine of the house: breakfast at 6, lunch at noon, dinner at 6, clean linens on Mondays, shopping on Thursdays, church on Sundays. Margaret ran a tight ship, but she was fair, and the work was satisfying in its own way. Lydia's sunburn healed, her blisters faded, and she began to regain the weight she had lost during her ordeal. She helped her aunt with cooking, learned to do laundry in the large tubs out back, mastered the art of making beds with proper hospital corners. In the evenings, she and Margaret would sit on the porch and watch the town settle in for the night, talking about everything and nothing. "You're doing well," Margaret said one evening about a week after Lydia's arrival. "Better than I expected, honestly. City girls usually take longer to adjust." "I'm not a city girl anymore," Lydia said. "I left that life behind." "Have you been into town much, met any young people your age?" "I've met a few people at church. Everyone's been welcoming." "But no one special." Margaret's tone was casual, but Lydia wasn't fooled. "If you're asking about Oliver, I haven't seen him since he brought me here. He usually comes to town on Thursdays. Tomorrow, actually." Margaret rocked in her chair, the picture of innocence. "I need supplies from the general store." "You should go, get to know the shop owners, see more of the town." Lydia suspected her aunt's motives but couldn't deny she wanted to see Oliver again. In the week since their parting, she had thought about him often: his kindness, his strength, the way he had looked at her like she mattered. No man had ever looked at her that way before. The next morning, armed with Margaret's shopping list and a basket, Lydia walked to the general store. The day was hot but not unbearable, and she wore one of the new dresses her aunt had helped her sew, pale blue cotton with white trim. Simple but pretty. She had pinned her hair up properly, and she felt more like herself than she had since leaving Philadelphia. The general store was busy, filled with ranchers and townspeople stocking up on supplies. Lydia made her way through the aisles, collecting flour, sugar, coffee, and the other items on her list. She was examining a bolt of fabric when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Fancy meeting you here." She turned and found Oliver standing a few feet away, his hat in his hands. He was clean and freshly shaved, wearing a pressed shirt and clean trousers. He looked good, and from the way his eyes widened slightly when he saw her, she suspected she looked different too. "Oliver," she said, her heart doing a strange flip in her chest. "Aunt Margaret said you usually come to town on Thursdays. Did she now?" A slow smile spread across his face. "That sounds like Miss Margaret making sure you knew when to expect me. She's not subtle." "No, she's not. But she means well." He stepped closer and Lydia caught the scent of soap and leather. "You look good, healthy. How are you settling in?" "Very well. Aunt Margaret has me working from dawn to dusk, but I don't mind. It feels good to be useful." "I'm glad to hear it." He paused, then said, "I was hoping I'd see you today. I've been wondering how you were doing." "Have you?" The words came out more breathless than Lydia intended. "Of course. It's not every day I rescue a beautiful woman from the desert." Lydia felt her cheeks warm. "You think I'm beautiful?" "I think you're extraordinary." The intensity in his gray-blue eyes made her breath catch. "Lydia, I know we've only just met, and I know you're still finding your feet here, but I'd like to see you again. Properly, I mean. Maybe I could call on you at the boarding house. Take you to dinner or a church social." Everything Lydia had been taught about propriety told her to demur, to play coy, to make him work for her attention. But she had come west to leave those rules behind, to build a life on her own terms, and she liked Oliver Vance. She liked him very much. "I'd like that," she said. "I'd like that very much." The smile that lit up Oliver's face was worth any risk. "Sunday, then. There's a social after church. I could escort you." "Sunday sounds perfect." They talked for a few more minutes, standing in the aisle of the general store while people maneuvered around them. Oliver told her about the ranch, about finding his lost cattle, about Thomas learning to rope. Lydia told him about her first week at the boarding house, about learning to cook for 8 people, about the traveling salesman who had tried to court her, until Margaret ran him off with a wooden spoon. Finally, the store owner cleared his throat loudly, reminding them that other people needed to shop. Oliver walked Lydia to the counter and insisted on carrying her basket, despite her protests. Outside, the sun was high and hot, and Main Street was busy with wagons and horses. "I'll see you Sunday," Oliver said, handing her the basket. "At church. I'll be there, front pew on the right side. Margaret always sits in the same place. I'll find you." He settled his hat back on his head and touched the brim. "Until Sunday, Miss Sullivan." "Until Sunday, Mr. Vance." Lydia walked back to the boarding house with a smile on her face and lightness in her step. Margaret was in the kitchen when she returned, and one look at Lydia's expression told the older woman everything she needed to know. "You saw him, didn't you?" "He's taking me to the church social on Sunday." Margaret's stern face softened into something almost tender. "Good. That man needs someone like you in his life, and you need someone like him. We barely know each other, Aunt Margaret. Sometimes you just know." "I knew with my Henry within 5 minutes of meeting him. When it's right, it's right." She took the basket from Lydia and began unpacking. "But you take your time, hear me? No rushing into anything, court properly, Let him prove himself. Yes, Aunt Margaret. But Lydia already knew, deep in her bones, that Oliver was someone special. Maybe it was because he had saved her life, or maybe it was something deeper, something that had sparked between them in that first moment in the desert. Whatever it was, it felt real and right and terrifying all at once. Sunday arrived wrapped in clear blue sky and moderate heat. Lydia dressed carefully in her best dress, the dove gray she had worn traveling, now cleaned and mended, and pinned her hair in an intricate style Margaret had shown her. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked confident, settled, happy. At church, she sat with Margaret in their usual pew and tried to focus on the sermon. But she couldn't help scanning the congregation, looking for Oliver. She finally spotted him near the back, sitting with his ranch hands. He caught her eye and smiled, and Lydia had to force herself to turn back to the preacher. The service seemed to last forever. When it finally ended and people began filtering outside for the social, Lydia's nerves kicked into high gear. What if Oliver changed his mind? What if she had misunderstood? What if Miss Sullivan? Oliver appeared at her elbow, offering his arm. "May I escort you? You may." She placed her hand on his arm, acutely aware of Margaret watching them with approval. The social was held in the churchyard under the shade of large cottonwood trees. Tables groaned under the weight of food: fried chicken, biscuits, pies, cakes, salads, and more. Musicians tuned their instruments on a makeshift stage, preparing for dancing later. Oliver filled 2 plates and found them a spot under a tree, slightly away from the main crowd. They sat on a blanket he borrowed from Jack's wagon, their shoulders nearly touching. "I've been looking forward to this all week," Oliver admitted, balancing his plate on his knee. "So have I." Lydia took a bite of chicken and nearly moaned. Whoever made this should open a restaurant. That would be Mrs. Peterson, the banker's wife. She wins the church baking competition every year. They ate and talked, their conversation flowing easily. Oliver told her stories about his ranch, about the hard early years when he nearly lost everything, about the satisfaction of finally turning a profit. Lydia told him about her childhood in Philadelphia, about her father's dream of moving to California that had died with him, about her own dreams of independence. "What do you want, Lydia?" Oliver asked, echoing the question he had asked that first night. "If you could have anything, what would it be?" Lydia thought carefully before answering. "I want a home. Not just a house, but a real home, a place where I belong. I want work that matters, work that I can be proud of. And I want someone to share it with, someone who sees me as an equal partner, not just an ornament or a servant." That doesn't seem like too much to ask. In my experience, it's nearly impossible. Most men want wives who will be silent, obedient, decorative. They don't want partners. Oliver turned to look at her fully, his gray-blue eyes serious. "Then most men are fools. A woman like you, strong, smart, brave, should be celebrated, not diminished. Is that what you want, a partner?" "Yes." The word was simple but weighted with meaning. "I've been alone for 7 years, Lydia. I've built something I'm proud of, but it feels empty sometimes. I want someone to share it with, someone who understands the work, who isn't afraid of it, someone who can stand beside me, not behind me." The air between them felt charged, electric. Lydia's heart was racing, and she could see her own feelings reflected in Oliver's eyes. "We barely know each other," she said softly. "Then let's fix that. Court me properly, Lydia Sullivan. Let me take you to dinners and dances and church socials. Let me show you my ranch, my life. And you show me yours. We'll take our time and do this right." "I'd like that very much." Music started up from the stage, a lively tune that had people flooding toward the makeshift dance floor. Oliver stood and offered his hand. "Dance with me." Lydia let him pull her to her feet, and they joined the other couples. Oliver was a surprisingly good dancer, leading her through the steps with confidence. They whirled and spun, laughing as they narrowly avoided colliding with other dancers. When the music slowed, he pulled her closer, one hand at her waist, the other clasping hers. "I meant what I said in the desert," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "You're braver than you know, Lydia. Coming west alone, surviving what you survived, starting over in a strange place. That takes real courage. I didn't feel brave. I felt terrified. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you keep going anyway." They danced through 3 more songs before Margaret caught Lydia's eye and tapped her watch meaningfully. Time to go. Lydia felt a pang of disappointment, but Oliver walked her back to the boarding house, taking his time, pointing out various buildings and telling her stories about the town. At the gate, he took both her hands in his. "May I call on you this week, maybe Wednesday evening?" "Yes, I'd like that." "Good." He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. "Until Wednesday, Lydia." She floated into the house, her hands still tingling where he had kissed them. Margaret was in the kitchen making tea. She looked up when Lydia entered, a knowing smile on her face. "Well, he's calling on me Wednesday. Good. That man's been needing someone to court for years. Half the single women in this county have tried and failed. You must be something special, or maybe he's just lonely." "Oliver Vance doesn't do anything out of loneliness or obligation. If he's courting you, it's because he wants to, because he sees something in you worth pursuing." Margaret poured 2 cups of tea and handed one to Lydia. "Just promise me you'll be smart about this. Don't rush. Get to know him properly. Make sure he's what you think he is." "I promise, Aunt Margaret." But as Lydia lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling and replaying every moment of the afternoon, she already knew. Oliver was exactly what she thought he was: honest, kind, strong, and decent. He was everything she had hoped to find out west and more. Wednesday couldn't come fast enough. Over the following weeks, Oliver became a regular fixture at the boarding house. He would arrive after dinner, freshly washed and dressed in clean clothes, and he and Lydia would sit on the porch or walk through town, always properly chaperoned by Margaret or one of the other boarders. They talked about everything: their pasts, their dreams, their fears, their hopes for the future. Oliver told her about the war, about things he had seen and done that still haunted him. He told her about his father, a hard man who had never approved of his only son, who had died angry and bitter. He told her about coming west looking for a fresh start, about the backbreaking work of building his ranch from nothing. In turn, Lydia shared her own stories. She told him about her mother's death from fever when Lydia was 12, about taking over the household at an age when she should have still been playing with dolls. She told him about watching her father slowly die, about the guilt she felt for sometimes wishing it would happen faster so the suffering would end. She told him about the fear she had felt boarding that train west, alone and uncertain, gambling everything on a new start. "We're both running from something," Oliver observed one evening as they walked down Elm Street in the fading light. "Trying to outrun our pasts. Is that what you think we're doing?" "Partly. But I think we're also running towards something, toward a future that's ours to shape." "I like that better," Lydia said. "Running toward instead of away from. Me too." One Saturday, Oliver invited Lydia to visit his ranch. Margaret gave her permission, but only if she accompanied them as chaperone. The 3 of them rode out in Oliver's wagon, Lydia sitting between him and her aunt, bouncing along the rutted road. The ranch looked different in daylight, bigger somehow. Oliver showed them around with obvious pride: the barn, the corrals, the cattle grazing in the distance. Jack, Pete, and Thomas greeted them warmly, and Lydia could see the respect they had for their boss. "Want to see the house?" Oliver asked, and Lydia nodded. Inside, everything was exactly as she remembered from that first desperate night. Oliver had added a few touches wildflowers in a jar on the table, a new braided rug by the hearth, but it was still sparse and masculine. Margaret inspected everything with a critical eye. "You need curtains," she declared, "and proper furniture. This place looks like a bunkhouse, not a home." "I'm not much for decorating," Oliver admitted, clearly. "Lydia, make note. If you ever marry this man, you'll have to civilize him." Lydia blushed crimson, but Oliver just laughed. "If I ever marry Lydia, she can do whatever she wants to this place. Paint it pink if she likes." "I wouldn't paint it pink," Lydia said. "What would you do?" She looked around, seeing the potential beneath the Spartan reality. "Curtains, like Aunt Margaret said, and maybe a real dining table instead of this work table. Some comfortable chairs for the evenings, pictures on the walls. Things that make it feel like a home instead of just a place to sleep." "I like it," Oliver said softly. "All of it." Their eyes met across the room, and the air between them felt charged with possibility. Margaret cleared her throat loudly, breaking the spell. They had lunch outside under the shade of the porch bread. Cheese, cold chicken, and lemonade that Oliver had made especially for the occasion. The food was simple but good, and Lydia felt completely at peace sitting there looking out over the prairie, listening to Oliver and Margaret talk about cattle prices and weather patterns. This could be her life, she realized. This ranch, this man, this future. It wasn't what she had imagined when she left Philadelphia, but it was better. It was real and solid and possible. On the ride back to town, Margaret dozed in the back of the wagon, leaving Oliver and Lydia alone for the first time all day. Oliver reached over and took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "I'm falling in love with you," he said quietly. "I know it's fast, and I know we should wait longer before talking about such things. But I don't want to pretend. I want you to know." Lydia's heart felt too big for her chest. "I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered. "It scares me how much." "Why does it scare you?" "Because I've never felt this way before. Because it's happening so fast. Because what if it doesn't last? What if we're just caught up in the drama of how we met?" "You really believe that?" She thought about it honestly. "No, I think this is real. I think you're real, and that's even more terrifying." Oliver squeezed her hand. "I won't hurt you, Lydia. I can't promise everything will be easy, but I can promise I'll always be honest with you, always be faithful, always respect you. That's the foundation we'll build on. That's all I want, all I need." They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, hands clasped, both lost in thoughts of the future. Behind them, Margaret pretended to sleep and smiled to herself. As summer deepened into fall, Oliver and Lydia's courtship continued. They attended church socials, harvest festivals, and barn dances. They took long walks through town and longer rides through the prairie. They talked and laughed and slowly, carefully, built something solid between them. One crisp October evening, Oliver arrived at the boarding house carrying a small box. Margaret answered the door and immediately ushered him into the parlor where Lydia was mending linens. "I'll leave you two alone," Margaret said, which was unusual. She always chaperoned. "But the door stays open." After she left, Oliver sat beside Lydia on the settee. He looked nervous, which was unlike him. His hands kept fidgeting with the box. "Is something wrong?" Lydia asked, setting aside her mending. "No, nothing's wrong, I just—" He took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot lately about the future, about what I want, about what we talked about at the ranch." "Oliver, let me finish, please." He opened the box, revealing a simple gold band with a small diamond. "Lydia Sullivan, I know we've only been courting for 4 months. I know by all rights I should wait longer, but I also know that life is short and unpredictable. I learned that in the war, and you learned it when you nearly died in the desert. We could wait another year, follow all the rules, do everything properly. Or we could acknowledge what we both know to be true, that we're meant for each other. Tears were streaming down Lydia's face, but she didn't wipe them away. Oliver, I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I'm asking if you'll consider being my wife. If you'll let me court you with that intention. And when you're ready, when you're absolutely certain, then we'll make it official. Yes, Lydia whispered. Yes to all of it. Yes to courting with intention. Yes to marrying you. Yes to building a life together. Just yes. Oliver's face transformed with joy. He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Then he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. It was Lydia's first real kiss, and it felt like coming home. When they finally pulled apart, they found Margaret standing in the doorway with tears in her eyes. "It's about time," she said gruffly. "I was starting to think you two would court until you were old and gray." "You're crying, Aunt Margaret," Lydia said, laughing through her own tears. "I'm not crying. I've got dust in my eyes." But she crossed the room and pulled them both into a fierce hug. "You have my blessing, both of you. Oliver, you take care of my girl. With my life," he promised. They set the wedding for the following April, giving them 6 months to prepare. It seemed like a long time and no time at all. Lydia and Margaret sewed her wedding dress, a beautiful creation of ivory silk with lace at the collar and sleeves. Oliver added onto the ranch house, building a second bedroom and a proper dining room. They ordered furniture from Kansas City, and Lydia picked out fabric for curtains and rugs. Winter came, harsh and cold, but Lydia barely noticed. She was too busy preparing for her new life, too full of excitement and anticipation. Oliver visited whenever he could, though the weather sometimes kept him at the ranch for days at a time. When he did come to town, they would sit by the fire in the boarding house parlor and make plans. "I want at least 3 children," Lydia said one snowy evening in February. "Only 3. "We can negotiate. How many do you want?" "Half a dozen, if we're blessed. I want the house full of noise and laughter. I want what I never had growing up, a real family." "Then we'll have a real family," Lydia promised. "As many children as God sees fit to give us." They talked about crops and cattle, about hiring more help for the ranch, about eventually buying more land. They talked about growing old together, about grandchildren, about the legacy they would build. Every conversation made their future feel more real, more possible. Spring arrived in a rush of wildflowers and warm breezes. Suddenly the wedding was 2 weeks away, then 1 week, then 3 days. Lydia could barely sleep for excitement. Her dress was finished, the church was reserved, invitations had been sent to everyone in town. Margaret had organized the reception with military precision, enlisting half the women in Concordia to help with food and decorations. The night before the wedding, Lydia sat on her bed in the boarding house and tried to absorb the fact that this was her last night as a single woman. Tomorrow she would marry Oliver Vance and begin a new chapter of her life. It should have been terrifying, but all she felt was peace and certainty. Margaret knocked and entered, carrying 2 cups of tea. She sat beside Lydia on the bed and they sipped in comfortable silence. "Are you happy?" Margaret asked finally, "So happy I can barely breathe." "Good, that's how it should be." Margaret set down her cup and took Lydia's hand. "I wish your father could be here to see this. He would be so proud of you." "I wish he was here too. But I think he'd be glad to know I'm with you, that I found Oliver, that I'm happy." "He would. Your father loved you more than anything in this world, Lydia. He wanted you to have a good life, a better life than he could give you. You found that. You found everything he wanted for you." They hugged, both crying now, and Lydia felt the last piece of her old life click into place. She had mourned her father, had carried that grief west with her. But now she could let it rest, could honor his memory by living fully and joyfully. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, the kind of perfect spring day that made you believe in miracles. Lydia dressed carefully with Margaret's help, pinning up her hair and arranging the simple veil. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she saw a woman transformed, confident, radiant, ready for whatever came next. The church was packed with people, everyone from town and several surrounding ranches. Oliver stood at the altar with Jack as his best man, wearing a new suit and looking nervous and handsome in equal measure. When Lydia appeared at the back of the church on Margaret's arm, his face lit up with such pure joy that several women in the congregation started crying. The ceremony passed in a blur. Lydia heard herself making vows, heard Oliver's steady voice promising to love and cherish her, felt the weight of the wedding band as he slipped it onto her finger. And then the preacher was pronouncing them husband and wife, and Oliver was kissing her in front of God and everyone, and the church erupted in applause. They walked down the aisle together as Mr. and Mrs. Oliver Vance, and Lydia felt like she was floating. Outside, people threw rice and shouted congratulations. Oliver helped her into the wagon he had decorated with flowers and ribbons, and they drove to the reception at the church hall. The celebration lasted hours. There was food and music and dancing. Lydia danced with Oliver, with Jack, with Pete, with Thomas, with half the men in town. She laughed until her sides ached, ate until she was stuffed, and felt thoroughly, completely happy. As the sun began to set, Oliver pulled her aside. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Vance?" "So ready." They said their goodbyes, accepting hugs and well wishes, then climbed back into the wagon. The ride to the ranch took an hour, and they spent it in comfortable silence, Oliver's arm around her shoulders, Lydia's head on his chest. The house looked different when they arrived. Someone, probably Jack, had lit lamps in all the windows, and soft light spilled out into the darkness. Inside, Lydia found that her things had been moved in, her clothes hanging in the wardrobe, her books on the shelf. The curtains she had made hung at the windows, and the dining table she had picked out sat in the new dining room. It looked like a home now, their home. Oliver carried her over the threshold even though she protested, and they stood in the middle of the main room just looking at each other. "I love you," he said simply. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret marrying me. I could never regret this. You saved me, Oliver, not just in the desert, but in every way that matters. You saved me too. I didn't even realize how lonely I was until I found you." They kissed then, deep and passionate, and Lydia felt desire bloom through her entire body. Oliver lifted her in his arms and carried her to their bedroom, kicking the door shut behind them. And on that first night as husband and wife, they learned each other completely, building intimacy and trust and love in equal measure. Life as a rancher's wife was everything Lydia had hoped for and harder than she had imagined. She rose before dawn to cook breakfast for Oliver and his men, spent her days cleaning, mending, gardening, and managing the household. In the evenings, she and Oliver would sit on the porch and talk about their day, making plans, dreaming dreams. She learned to ride properly, learned to rope, learned to help with the cattle when Oliver was short-handed. She learned to shoot Oliver's rifle and his pistol, because out on the prairie, everyone needed to know how to defend themselves. She learned to read the weather, to conserve water during dry spells, to celebrate rain like a gift from God. And she learned that she was stronger than she had ever imagined. The woman who had nearly died in the desert would have laughed at the idea of riding out to check fence lines, or helping deliver a breech calf, or standing up to a drunk cowboy who got too familiar. But Lydia did all these things and more, discovering reserves of courage and competence she hadn't known she possessed. Their first year of marriage was marked by hard work, deep love, and growing understanding. They had their first real fight in June. Oliver wanted to buy more cattle. Lydia thought they should save the money for emergencies. They argued for 2 days before reaching a compromise. Buy half the cattle Oliver wanted, save the rest. They made love afterward with an intensity born of conflict and resolution. And Lydia understood that fighting didn't mean the end of love, just the stretching of it to accommodate two strong wills. In August, Lydia realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another month to be sure, then told Oliver one evening after supper. He stared at her for a long moment, then let out a whoop of joy and spun her around the kitchen until she was dizzy and laughing. "We're going to have a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We're going to have a baby. Yes, we are, sometime in March if my calculations are right. March. That's perfect. The hard part of winter will be over and we'll have time to prepare before spring roundup." Always practical, her Oliver. But she could see the emotion in his eyes, the joy and fear and anticipation all mixed together. That night, he held her with extra gentleness, his hand resting on her still flat stomach, talking to their unborn child about the ranch and the horses and how loved they already were. The pregnancy was difficult. Lydia was sick for the first 4 months, barely able to keep down food. Margaret came to stay with them for a few weeks, helping with the household while Lydia recovered her strength. Oliver hovered and worried, treating her like she might break at any moment. It drove Lydia crazy, but she also found it endearing. By December, she had regained her energy and her appetite. Her belly swelled with their growing child, and she found herself constantly amazed by the life inside her. Oliver would spend hours talking to her stomach, telling stories and singing off key songs. Jack, Pete, and Thomas became protective uncles-to-be, constantly asking how she was feeling and arguing about whether the baby would be a boy or a girl. "I hope it's a boy," Oliver said one February evening as they lay in bed, his hand on her belly feeling the baby kick. "A son to carry on the ranch." "I hope it's healthy," Lydia corrected. "Boy or girl doesn't matter as long as our child is strong and whole." "You're right." "Of course you're right. I keep thinking about being a father, about doing it better than mine did, teaching our child to be kind and strong and honest." "You'll be a wonderful father," Lydia said with certainty. "You're already wonderful with Thomas, and he's not even yours." "Thomas is easy. Our child will be different. The stakes are higher. Then we'll figure it out together, like we figure out everything." Labor came on a warm March evening, 2 weeks before Lydia expected it. Oliver was out checking on a pregnant mare when her water broke. She sent Thomas to fetch him and Margaret while she tried to stay calm. The pain started slowly, then built in intensity until she was gasping through contractions. Margaret arrived first, taking charge with brisk efficiency. She boiled water, gathered clean linens, and examined Lydia with experienced hands. "First babies take their time," she said. "This could be hours yet." It was 13 hours, in fact, 13 hours of pain and struggle and fear. Oliver stayed with her the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement. When she screamed that she couldn't do this, that it was too hard, he told her the same thing he had said in the desert. "You're braver than you know, Lydia. You can do this. You can do anything." And somehow, with those words echoing in her ears, she found the strength to push, to bear down through the pain and bring their child into the world. The baby emerged in a rush with the dawn light, squalling lustily, red-faced and perfect. "It's a boy," Margaret announced, cutting and tying the cord. She cleaned him quickly and placed him on Lydia's chest. "Your son, Lydia." Lydia looked down at the tiny, perfect creature in her arms and felt her heart crack wide open. He had dark hair like Oliver and her pale skin. His eyes, when he opened them, were blue like all newborns, but she suspected they would turn gray like his father's. She touched his impossibly small fingers, his soft cheek, unable to believe she had created this miracle. "Hello, James," she whispered. They had already chosen the name James Thomas Vance, after Oliver's best friend who had died in the war and their young ranch hand. "Welcome to the world, my darling boy." Oliver was crying unashamedly, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his wife and son. "He's perfect. You're perfect. I love you both so much." The next few months passed in a blur of sleepless nights and exhausted days. James was a demanding baby, hungry and fussy, and Lydia sometimes felt like she was drowning. But Oliver helped however he could, changing diapers, walking the floor with James when he cried, bringing Lydia food and water while she nursed. Margaret stayed for 3 weeks, teaching Lydia everything she knew about caring for infants. Slowly, they found their rhythm. James began sleeping for longer stretches. Lydia learned to nurse efficiently while doing other tasks. Oliver mastered the art of getting the baby to burp. And gradually, the fog of exhaustion lifted enough for them to enjoy their son, his first real smile, his growing awareness of the world around him, the way he would grip Oliver's finger with surprising strength. By the time James was 6 months old, life had settled into a new normal. The ranch kept running, though Oliver hired an additional hand to help while Lydia was occupied with the baby. They worked together, the 3 of them, building their family and their future one day at a time. When James was 2, Lydia became pregnant again. This time she knew what to expect, and the pregnancy was easier. Their second son, William Robert Vance, called Will, was born in November during the first snowfall of winter. He was calmer than James had been, content to sleep and eat and observe the world with serious eyes. 2 years after that came their only daughter, Catherine Margaret Vance, named for Oliver's mother and Lydia's aunt. Kathy was a force of nature from birth, strong-willed and vocal, with her mother's determination and her father's stubbornness. She kept them all on their toes. And finally, when Lydia was 30 and convinced they were done having children, she found herself pregnant one more time. This 4th child, another boy they named Daniel, was a surprise but a welcome one. He completed their family, filling the house with the noise and chaos Oliver had dreamed of. The ranch prospered over the years. They bought more land, increased their herd, built a proper barn and additional outbuildings. Oliver and Lydia became pillars of the Concordia community, hosting barn dances and church socials, helping neighbors in need, serving as examples of what hard work and partnership could build. Margaret lived with them after she closed the boarding house, occupying the small house Oliver built for her near the main ranch. She helped raise the children, passing on her wisdom and her strength. She lived to see all 4 of her great-nieces and nephews grown, then died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78, content in the knowledge that Lydia was happy and thriving. Jack and Pete eventually retired, staying on the ranch in a small cabin Oliver built for them, helping out when they felt like it, and spending most of their time fishing and telling exaggerated stories to the Vance children. Thomas grew up to be Oliver's foreman, married a girl from town, and had 5 children of his own. The years passed quickly, marked by birthdays and holidays, by droughts and good harvests, by challenges overcome and dreams achieved. Lydia watched her children grow strong and capable, each one inheriting different aspects of their parents. James became a natural rancher like his father. Will loved books and numbers and eventually became the ranch's accountant. Kathy could outride and outrope most men and swore she would never marry, though she eventually fell hard for a quiet veterinarian. Daniel, the baby, became the peacemaker of the family, the one who could smooth over any dispute. Oliver's hair turned gray, then white, and his face became weathered by sun and wind. Lydia developed lines around her eyes and mouth, evidence of years spent smiling and laughing. They grew old together, still partners, still best friends, still deeply in love. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Oliver took Lydia back to the spot where he had found her in the desert. The landscape had changed. There was a road now, and a small settlement in the distance, but the essential character of the place remained. Harsh, unforgiving, beautiful in its own way. "Remember that day?" Oliver asked, standing beside her in the afternoon sun. "How could I forget? I was convinced I was going to die. I knew the moment I saw you that you were special. Something about the way you held yourself, even half dead from thirst. You had this look in your eyes that said you weren't done yet, that you were going to survive no matter what. I wasn't that brave. I was terrified. You were both. You're the bravest person I've ever known, Lydia Vance. These 30 years with you have been the greatest gift of my life." Lydia leaned into her husband's side, feeling the solid warmth of him, the strength that had never wavered. "You told me that day that I was braver than I knew. I didn't believe you then. But you've spent 3 decades proving it to me, showing me what I'm capable of. We showed each other. That's what partnership means." They stood there in the desert where their story had begun, hands clasped, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. And Lydia felt the circle complete itself, from desperate woman lost in the wilderness to wife, mother, grandmother, respected member of her community. From terrified to confident, from alone to surrounded by love, years continued to roll by like the endless prairie wind. The grandchildren came, 11 in total, filling the ranch house with noise and laughter during holidays and summer visits. Lydia taught her granddaughters to sew and cook and stand up for themselves. Oliver taught his grandsons to rope and ride and treat women with respect. Together, they passed on the values they had lived by: hard work, honesty, partnership, love. When Oliver was 72, he had a heart attack while working with the cattle. It was quick, the doctor said, likely painless. He died doing what he loved on the land he had built, surrounded by the family he had created. Lydia was 68 and suddenly alone for the first time in more than 4 decades. The grief was crushing. She had lost her other half, her partner, her best friend. For weeks she could barely function, moving through the days like a ghost. But slowly, with the help of her children and grandchildren, she began to heal. She realized that Oliver wasn't truly gone. He lived on in their children's faces, in the ranch they had built together, in the memories they had created. She lived another 8 years, staying active and involved in the ranch and the community. She saw 2 more great-grandchildren born, taught Kathy's daughter how to make her special apple pie, and wrote down the story of how she and Oliver had met so that future generations would know. On a warm spring evening in 1928, exactly 55 years after Oliver had found her in the desert, Lydia sat on the porch of the ranch house and watched the sun set. Her body was failing, she could feel it, but her mind was clear. She thought about her life, about the journey that had brought her from Philadelphia to Kansas, from desperation to abundance, from fear to love. She thought about the woman she had been at 22, lost, alone, convinced she was going to die in the desert. That woman could never have imagined the life that awaited her, the love, the family, the home, the purpose. All of it born from a moment of chance when a cowboy had ridden past at exactly the right time. "You were right, Oliver," she whispered to the wind. "I was braver than I knew. We both were." James found her there an hour later, peaceful in the rocking chair, a soft smile on her face. She had gone the way she wanted quietly, on the ranch she loved, at the end of a day well lived. James and his children kept it running, then his grandchildren, each one adding their own mark while honoring the foundation Oliver and Lydia had built. The house was expanded and modernized, but the original structure remained, preserved as a tribute to the couple who had started it all. Visitors to the ranch would often ask about the twin graves on the hill and the unusual inscription. And whoever was giving the tour would tell the story how Lydia Sullivan had been lost in the desert in the summer of 1873, dying of thirst and exhaustion. How a young rancher named Oliver Vance had found her, had seen her strength when she couldn't see it herself, had spoken words that would define both their lives. They would tell about the courtship, the wedding, the 4 children and 11 grandchildren. They would talk about the partnership that had built one of the most successful ranches in Kansas, about the respect and equality that had defined their marriage, about the love that had sustained them through 37 years together. But mostly they would tell about that moment in the desert, when a desperate woman and a kind cowboy had found each other at exactly the right time. When he had said the words that would change both their lives, "You're braver than you know." It was a love story born in the harsh beauty of the Kansas prairie, forged in hard work and mutual respect, and sealed with a commitment that death itself couldn't break. It was proof that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best, that getting lost can mean being found, that weakness can reveal strength, that desperation can transform into hope. And on summer evenings, when the wind blew across the prairie and the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, you could almost hear their voices carried on the breeze. Lydia laughing at something Oliver said, Oliver telling another story about the old days. The sound of a family gathered on the porch, connected across generations by the strength and courage of 2 people who had chosen each other when it mattered most. The ranch stood as their legacy, not just the land and the cattle and the buildings, but the values they had lived by. Hard work, honesty, partnership, love. Every person who lived there or visited there or heard their story understood that they were standing on ground made sacred by 2 ordinary people who had done extraordinary things simply by choosing to see the best in each other. In the end, Oliver had been right about so many things. Lydia had been braver than she knew. She had been strong enough to survive the desert, strong enough to build a new life in a harsh land, strong enough to be a true partner in every sense of the word. And in seeing that strength, in believing in it even when she couldn't, Oliver had helped her become the woman she was meant to be. Their story became legend in Concordia and the surrounding area. Young couples would visit the graves on the hill, hoping some of that love and strength would rub off on them. The Concordia Historical Society published a small book about their lives, using Lydia's written account and interviews with their descendants. Every year on the anniversary of their wedding, the family would gather at the ranch for a celebration, keeping their memory alive. And so Oliver, Vance and Lydia Sullivan Vance lived on, not just in the memories of those who had known them, but in the very fabric of the land they had loved. Their story was proof that love could be found in the unlikeliest places, that strength could emerge from desperation, that 2 broken people could heal each other and build something beautiful. They had started with nothing but courage and hope. They had ended with everything that mattered: love, family, home, purpose. And between that desperate beginning and that peaceful ending, they had lived a life full of meaning and joy, a life that would inspire generations to come. The desert where they had met remained harsh and unforgiving, a place where the unwary could still die if they weren't careful. But it was also beautiful in its own way, a testament to survival and strength. And every spring, wildflowers would bloom there, tiny splashes of color against the pale earth, as if the land itself was celebrating the miracle that had happened there so many years ago. When the great-grandchildren asked about their famous ancestors, they would hear the story again and again. And the lesson was always the same. That courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to keep going despite it. That love isn't just a feeling, but a choice made every single day. That partnership means seeing your spouse as an equal, respecting their strength, supporting their dreams. And most importantly, that sometimes the right person shows up at exactly the right moment to remind you of something you've forgotten about yourself, that you're braver than you know, stronger than you think, and capable of more than you ever imagined. That was the legacy Oliver and Lydia Vance left behind. Not just land or money or possessions, but wisdom earned through living fully and loving deeply. Not just stories, but lessons that applied to every generation. Not just history, but inspiration for the future. And as the sun set over the Kansas prairie on another beautiful evening, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold, the ranch they had built together stood strong and solid, a monument to two people who had found each other when they both needed it most, who had chosen love over fear, partnership over domination, courage over comfort, who had proven, day after day and year after year, that the simple act of believing in someone, of seeing their strength and reflecting it back to them, could change the entire course of their life. In the end, that's what Oliver had done for Lydia in the desert. He hadn't just given her water and shelter. He had given her belief in herself, had seen her courage when she couldn't see it, had spoken words that became a truth she would live into for the rest of her life. And Lydia had done the same for him. She had seen the lonely rancher who needed a partner, who needed someone to build a life with, who needed to be needed. She had chosen him, had believed in the future they could create together, had worked beside him as an equal to make their dreams reality. Together, they had been unstoppable. Together, they had built something that would last long after they were gone. Together, they had proven that true love isn't about perfection or ease, it's about showing up for each other, day after day, choosing partnership over selfishness, choosing courage over comfort, choosing love over everything else. That was the real story. Not just of two people who met in a desert and fell in love, but of two people who built a life together through hard work, mutual respect, and unwavering commitment. Who raised a family and built a legacy and showed everyone around them what real partnership looked like. And their story would live on, passed down through generations, inspiring others to be brave enough to love deeply, to work hard, to treat their partners as equals, to build something that matters. Because in the end, that's what legacy really means, not what you leave behind, but what you inspire in others. The Vance Ranch would continue for generations, a living testament to what two people could build when they truly believed in each other. And every person who lived there or visited there would feel it, the strength of that foundation, the power of that love, the truth of those words spoken so long ago in the desert, "You're braver than you know." It was a truth that applied not just to Lydia, but to everyone. A truth that would echo through time, reminding people that they were stronger than they thought, more capable than they believed, and worthy of love and respect and partnership. And so the story ended where it began, in the Kansas prairie, under an endless sky, with courage and hope and love. A story of two people who found each other at exactly the right moment and chose to build something beautiful together. A story that would live forever in the land they loved and the family they created. A story, in the end, about the power of believing in someone at their lowest moment and showing them who they could become. About seeing strength where others saw weakness. About choosing love when it would have been easier to walk away. Oliver and Lydia Vance had lived that story fully, had embodied those values completely, and had left behind a legacy that would inspire and guide for generations to come. And that, more than anything else, was the true measure of a life well lived.